What does it mean to be truly strong? If you walk into any commercial gym in the world, the definition seems pretty straightforward. It's written in chalk on the platforms and reflected in the mirrors. Strength is a 400-pound deadlift. It's veins popping out of your biceps as you curl 50-pound dumbbells. It's the ability to push, pull, and squat massive amounts of perfectly balanced knurled iron for sets of 8 to 12 reps. But out in the real world, out where the sun beats down, where the ground is uneven, and where the objects you have to move don't come with ergonomic handles, the definition of strength changes entirely. Today we are going to look at a clash of two completely different physical ecosystems. It is the battle of the manufactured muscle versus the blue-collar grind. It's the 60-minute hypertrophy session versus the 10-hour shift. This is the story of what happens when a prime, peak physical condition gym bro goes head-to-head with a 55-year-old career mason on a weekend landscaping project. Spoiler alert, the gym didn't prepare him for this. Welcome to the channel. If you've ever wondered why your grandpa with a beer belly could out-wrestle you, or why farm boys seem to possess superhuman grip strength, you're in the right place. Let's dive into the story of the real-world stamina. The setup was simple. Mark, a suburban homeowner, decided it was finally time to build the backyard patio and outdoor kitchen of his wife's dreams. But to save a few $1,000s on labor, Mark opted to act as the general contractor, hire one absolute professional to lead the build, and supply the grunt labor himself by recruiting his friends with promises of free beer and pizza. Brad is Mark's younger cousin. Brad is 26 years old, stands 6'2", weighs a solid 215 pounds, and hovers right around 8% body fat. Brad lives at the gym. He meticulously tracks his macros. He understands the intricacies of the sliding filament theory of muscle contraction, and he periodizes his training blocks like a Russian Olympic weightlifter. When Mark asked Brad for help moving materials, Brad didn't just agree, he scoffed at the idea that it would even be difficult. "Bro," Brad had said over the phone, "I do heavy farmer's carries with 100-pound kettlebells for fun. Hauling a few bricks and mixing some concrete? That's just light cardio. I'll treat it as an active recovery day." Brad arrived at the job site at 7:45 a.m., 30 minutes after downing a double scoop of sour green apple pre-workout. He was wearing a low-cut stringer tank top, a lifting belt loosely slung over his shoulder, and an attitude of absolute physical supremacy. He was ready to conquer the driveway. Then the professional arrived. Sal pulled up in a rattling pickup truck that had clearly seen 3 decades of hard labor. Sal was the master mason Mark had hired to actually lay the brick and pour the slabs. Sal was 55 years old. He stood 5'9" and weighed 230 pounds, a significant portion of which was concentrated in a spherical solid gut that hung proudly over his belt buckle. Sal didn't drink pre-workout. Sal drank black coffee from a thermos that looked like it had survived a war. He wore a long-sleeved, thick flannel shirt despite the rising temperature, heavy denim jeans coated in a permanent layer of white dust, and leather boots that had molded to his feet over thousands of hours on the job. Clamped firmly in the corner of his mouth was a cheap, stubby cigar. Brad looked at Sal's physique and internally smiled. To Brad's trained eye, Sal was horribly deconditioned. He had no visible muscle definition, poor posture, and terrible cardiovascular indicators. Brad figured he would have to carry the old man through the day. At 8 o'clock a.m. sharp, the objective was set. They needed to move 3 pallets of cinderblocks, 2 pallets of brick, and 40 80-pound bags of concrete from the driveway, down the side of the house, across 50 yards of uneven, slightly uphill grass to the backyard build site. For the first hour, the gym bro moved like a superhero. Fueled by beta-alanine and pure ego, Brad treated the task like a high-intensity interval training session. He refused to carry just one cinder block. He grabbed two and sometimes tried to balance a third on top, gripping the rough edges with his chalk-free hands. He was practically jogging across the lawn. Every time he picked up a load, he used perfect gym form. He squared his feet, hinged deeply at the hips, braced his core, engaged his lats, and drove through his heels. He was performing a textbook deadlift with every single pickup and a perfect farmer's carry on every single walk. "Pace yourself, kid," Sal mumbled around his cigar, not even looking up. Sal, meanwhile, was a study in profound, unbothered slowness. Sal did not run. Sal did not jog. Sal walked at a rhythmic, plodding pace that looked almost agonizingly sluggish compared to Brad's explosive sprints. Sal carried one cinder block in each hand. When he picked them up, he didn't do a perfect hip hinge. He just kind of bent over with a rounded back, grabbed the blocks, and used the momentum of his hips to swing them up into a carrying position. To Brad's personal trainer brain, Sal's form was a one-way ticket to a herniated disc. By 9 o'clock a.m., Brad had moved nearly twice as much material as Sal. Brad was sweating profusely, his tank top soaked, but he was riding the endorphin high. "Lightweight, baby," he muttered to himself as he sprinted past Sal for the 20th time. But the real world has a funny way of collecting debts. And by 9:30 a.m., the bill came due. The first thing to fail wasn't Brad's muscles, it was his grip. A barbell is perfectly designed to be held. It is balanced. It has knurling to create friction. A cinder block is the exact opposite. It is an awkward, top-heavy rectangle of abrasive concrete that actively wants to tear the skin off your fingers. Brad's grip strength, built on smooth barbells and chalk, began to disintegrate under the constant, awkward pinching required to hold the blocks. His forearms felt like they were filled with wet cement. Next came the lower back pump. In the gym, you do a set of deadlifts for maybe 30 seconds, and then you sit on a padded bench for 3 minutes looking at your phone. Out here, there was no rest period. Brad had essentially performed 200 sub-maximal deadlifts in an hour and a half. Because he was bracing his core so hard and insisting on perfect tension every time he bent over, his spinal erectors were chronically engorged with blood. The pump was so severe it was becoming agonizing. By 10:15 a.m., the beta-alanine tingles had worn off, replaced by a crashing wave of central nervous system fatigue. The uneven ground of the lawn was destroying his stabilizer muscles. His calves, trapped in flat-soled minimalist lifting shoes, were screaming from absorbing the shock of the uneven turf while carrying heavy loads. Brad went from carrying 3 blocks to 2 blocks to 1 block. His brisk jog devolved into a painful shuffling limp. "Just taking a quick 5, Brad gasped to Mark, retreating to the shade of an oak tree. He slumped against the trunk, his hamstrings tight as piano wires, his lower back locked in a spasm. He cracked open a massive energy drink, desperately hoping for a chemical rescue. From the shade, Brad watched Sal. And it was in this moment of defeat that the young gym bro truly witnessed the masterclass of blue-collar biomechanics. Sal had not stopped once. Sal had not taken a water break. The cigar in his mouth was now half-smoked, but the ash miraculously never seemed to fall. Brad watched closely as Sal approached a pallet of 80-pound concrete bags. If Brad were to lift one, he would squat down, bear hug it, squeeze it to his chest, and march it over. But Sal didn't lift the bags with his muscles. He lifted it with physics. Sal nudged the bag with his knee to find its center of mass. He grabbed the heavy paper corners, gave a short, sharp pull to get the concrete inside to shift, and in one fluid, terrifyingly efficient motion, he used the bag's own momentum to roll it up his thigh, across his hip, and onto his right shoulder. It was a transfer of energy so smooth it looked like a magic trick. Sal wasn't using active muscle tension to carry the load. Once the bag was on his shoulder, the weight was stacked directly over his skeletal structure. His bones and joints were carrying the weight, not his deltoids and biceps. He wasn't fighting gravity, he was negotiating with it. Sal's walking pace hadn't changed by a single mile per hour since 8 o'clock a.m. He was a relentless metronomic rhythm. Step, 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 drop, turn, walk, step, step, step. He moved like water flowing downhill, taking the path of least resistance, wasting zero energy on unnecessary tension, zero energy on looking good, and zero energy on bracing muscles that didn't need to be braced. This is the secret of farm strength, or, if you prefer, old man strength. In a commercial gym, the goal of bodybuilding is actually to make a movement as difficult as possible for a specific muscle group to stimulate growth. You isolate the bicep. You create mind-muscle connection. You maximize tension. You deliberately waste energy to break down tissue. But in the trades, the goal is the exact opposite. The goal is to make the movement as easy as possible. The body adapts to this over decades. Sal's fascia, the connective tissue surrounding his muscles, had thickened and remodeled itself into a highly efficient, spring-like network. His tendons were dense as steel cables. His central nervous system was so highly optimized for this specific type of labor that it required a fraction of the neurological output that Brad's brain was screaming to generate. Brad's muscles were giant, gas-guzzling V8 engines. They produced incredible horsepower for a quarter-mile drag race. But Sal's body was a hyper-efficient diesel tractor. It wasn't fast, it wasn't flashy, but it could tow a house for 3 days straight on half a tank of gas. That afternoon was a brutal, humbling blur for Brad. After his 30-minute break in the shade, he dragged himself back out to help, but the damage was done. Lactic acid had pooled in his legs. His grip was so shot he could barely open a water bottle, let alone pinch a rough cinder block. He found himself dragging his feet, his pristine lifting shoes now scuffed and coated in gray dust. He tried to switch to carrying the 80-pound concrete bags. He managed 3. On the 4th, his exhausted lower back finally said no, sending a sharp warning tweak up his spine. From 1 o'clock p.m. onward, Brad was essentially relegated to opening bags with a box cutter and holding the hose while Sal mixed the concrete in the wheelbarrow. Through it all, Sal never sped up and he never slowed down. The temperature peaked at 91 degrees. Sal didn't take off his flannel shirt. He didn't complain. He just kept turning out batches of mortar, laying blocks, tapping them level with the handle of his trowel, and wiping away the excess. By 4:30 p.m., the massive pile in the driveway was completely gone. The job was done. At least, the materials were staged, the footings were poured, and the retaining wall was built. Sal walked over to the hose, rinsed off his trowel, and washed his hands with a bar of pumice soap he kept in his truck. He didn't look tired. He didn't look out of breath. He looked exactly the same as he had at 8 o'clock a.m., just slightly dustier. He walked over to Mark, collected his cash for the day's labor, and nodded. "Good start. We'll lay the pavers Monday." Sal then looked down at Brad, who was currently sitting on an overturned Home Depot bucket, staring blankly at the grass, shivering slightly despite the heat, a classic sign of severe central nervous system exhaustion. Sal reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a fresh, cheap cigar, bit off the end, and spit it into the grass. He struck a match on the zipper of his jeans and lit it. "You got a lot of heart, kid," Sal said, puffing a cloud of blue smoke into the late afternoon air. "Muscles look good too, but tomorrow you're going to wish you didn't have them." Sal climbed into his rattling F-250, turned the key, and rumbled off down the suburban street, heading to the local dive bar for a cold beer and a plate of wings. Sal was right. The next morning, Brad experienced a level of delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS, that he hadn't felt since the first week he had ever touched a barbell. His lats were seized. His spinal erectors felt like they had been beaten with a baseball bat. His fingers were stiff and swollen, the skin scraped raw from the concrete. Getting out of bed was a 5-minute negotiation with his own nervous system. Sitting on the toilet required him to grab the towel rack for support. His 215 pounds of finely sculpted, gym-built muscle had been absolutely dismantled by a man 30 years his senior who probably hadn't eaten a vegetable or tracked a macro in his entire life. It was a profound humbling. It was the realization that strength is highly contextual. If you put Sal in a gym and asked him to barbell squat 300 pounds below parallel, his knees might explode and he'd probably fail the lift. He doesn't have the mobility, the specific neurological grooving for the barbell, or the peak force production. But if you put a barbell athlete on a job site, they will quickly discover that moving symmetrical iron for an hour in an air-conditioned room does not buy you endurance, the tendon strength, or the biomechanical wisdom to move thousands of pounds of awkward, shifting weight under the sun for 10 hours straight. Gym strength is an incredible thing. It builds health, bone density, and aesthetics. But there is a very real, very undeniable difference between building muscle for the sake of muscle and building a body because it's the only tool you have to put food on the table for 30 years. That blue-collar, real-world stamina isn't built in 6-week cycles. It's forged over decades of calluses, leverage, and the quiet, relentless rhythm of getting the job done. So, the next time you see a tradesman with a bit of a gut and gray in his beard, don't challenge him to an arm wrestle and definitely don't try and outwork him on a Saturday. Just hand him a cold drink and watch a master at work. What do you guys think? Have you ever experienced farm strength firsthand? Have you ever had your gym muscles humbled by a real-world task? Let me know your best stories down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown of real-world physiology versus gym aesthetics, do me a huge favor and smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the limits of human performance. Until next time, keep lifting heavy, but remember to respect the grind. I'll see you in the next video.